The burden of proof in your dependency case, in your first try, the first module 1, module 2, what can you explain the difference and why it is different versus a case like a regular murder case or any other case? Because it seems to me that they will take somebody's word and just run with it as it's completely true.
Aaron Carranza. Aaron.
Yes.
I got a message.
I have a question for you. Yeah. From Facebook, a question. The burden of proof in your dependency case, in your first try, the first module 1, module 2. What can you explain the difference and why it is different versus a case like a regular murder case or any other case? Because it seems to me that they will take somebody's word and just run with it as it's completely true when there's no follow through to find out if it's true or not. So they just take person A's word as fact. How is that possible? Why is that allowed?
Okay, so you're mixing some apples and oranges from a legal analysis point of view. Burden of proof is what has to be proven by someone in order to win a case.
Right.
Now there are 3 burdens of proof in California. There's the beyond a reasonable doubt, which is used in criminal cases. And I usually say, just as an example, that's like 95%. Then the next is clear and convincing evidence. And that's 75%. And then there's preponderance of evidence, and that is more than 50%. Now notice I didn't say 51%, it's more than 50%. Right. All right, so it could be 50.1%. So those are the 3 levels of burden of proof. Now, sometimes, you might get the impression that there's no distinction between them. But there is a distinction. And in the attorney's minds and in the judge's minds, that's something that has to be considered. When you do a jury trial, there's part of the opening or closing or the jury instructions where these things are actually read and explained to the jurors so that they can know, what the burden of proof is and what it means. So I'll give you an example. I tell this to a lot of people. O.J. Simpson was prosecuted for killing Nicole, but the jury didn't find beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it, so he wasn't convicted criminally. But then they walked across the street and they sued him for money for killing, Nicole Brown. And they won. And the reason why they won that was because it was at a lower standard. It was preponderance of evidence.
Okay.
Okay, so you see the difference between the 2 burdens? Right?
Right. So my next question is, why wouldn't this distinction be just as high when you're removing someone's child from them?
That is a very good question, because I've had a lot of people tell me, especially guys in jail, I'd rather keep my kids or keep my kids with the family, and that's far more important than me going to jail. But that's not the law. The law is, if you want to take someone's children away, it's clear and convincing evidence and preponderance of evidence, depending on what module you're in and where you are in that module.
So we have to change the laws.
Well, what have I
been saying?
Because
you would think taking someone's child away, it would be extreme, right?
In my mind, it
They
is.
would have to prove it. Yeah, they would
In my
have to
mind,
prove that this is happening.
right.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, and economics is always a consideration, right? If you're going to take
Hmm.
somebody's child away, it should be a higher burden of proof, and they should have a right to have a jury trial.
Right.
If you're going to put them
Right.
in jail for a year, they get to have a jury trial. How about if they're going to lose their
Yeah.
child forever?
Yeah.
There are a few states in this country that allow you to have the right to have a jury trial. Did you know that? California's not one of
No,
them.
I didn't.
Yeah,
No,
California's
I was
not
the
one of them.
California one of them.
No, 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 no.
Hmm.
And the reason I've heard is because it's so expensive to have a jury trial, so time consuming. What are there, 10 to 12 million people in LA County? And,
Hmm.
you have hundreds, if not thousands of cases every month. What if somebody said, hey, I want a jury trial? Well, that's not going to be,
Well, if you're going to take their kid, then they should be allowed
well,
to.
well, that's just your opinion.
That's true.
Now, how are you going to make your opinion the law?
Right. Go legislation. Go.
You,
Contact your local representative.
and vote. Get
Right.
get your
Both.
friends and relatives and people in your community to
I don't.
vote.
I don't think people understand how important voting is just on the local level. Forget about the presidential elections, but your local level, your voting is so important. That's where everything happens.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. When and this is what I envisioned for our group. When I was growing up, and I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. Predominantly African American community at that time. And what happened was right before elections, my grandparents would get mailers, little
Mhm.
giant postcards, and it told you on the front and back who to vote for. Who the
Mm.
black leaders were going to be voting for and who they wanted you to be voting
Right.
for. So all you had to do when you go to vote, you didn't have to know anything. You don't have to know anything about the candidate, about the proposition, about the law. Just, Tom Bradley says vote for this guy. Tom Bradley says vote for this gal. Tom Bradley says vote yes on this proposition. And that's what
Mhm.
people did. Now, I don't know if they still
Right.
have those type of mailers or if they're even legal. I can imagine they were very expensive, you know. But it was basically you don't have to educate yourself on anything, and we're just going to tell you how to vote. Imagine how
Right.
powerful that was. I mentioned the word Tom Bradley, but he was like a very famous African American politician. He's deceased now, but he was like a police officer, and then he was the councilman in the city of Los Angeles, and he was, I think, the first, you
2 minutes.
African American mayor in Los Angeles. But
Mhm.
very powerful. In terms of
So,
controlling that segment of society and their vote. Imagine
I
if
see.
you could get these parents together and these relatives together and tell them or suggest to them how to vote. It
Right.
would be it would
Oh,
be
right.
it would be a different world in the CPS
Yeah.
arena. Because
So,
you could change the laws, you could make the burdens of proof higher, you could give people the right to have a jury trial.
mhm.
When you have a jury trial, generally the jurors make the decision, not the judge, right?
Right. Right. And there's more likelihood of you getting parents on there,
Well,
more understanding.
right.
But my next question with that is, what happens if a parent goes against teaching?
1 minute.
What if they decide, what, I'm not going to do, what you want to do, other than the obvious, and take your children? What retaliation,
Aaron, it could be anything. It could be nothing. It could be retaliation. It could be a little retaliation. It could be, it's just difficult to say. If you want to protect people in this situation, you're going to have to give them more rights. You're going to have to make it harder for them to take your child away. Okay, we got to take another break right now. This is The Secret, How to Fight Child Protective Services and Win. We'll be back after the news and these messages.